So this computer right here has been my daily driver for the past 3 months, and this is the HP Envy 13 AD173CL, which is probably around the late 2017 to early 2018 model, and I got this for $700, and today we're going to review it. So the chassis is really nice. It has a smooth silver metal frame, as well as this minimalistic logo, so you're supposed to infer that it says HP right here with the 4 lines. It's minimalistic, it's sleek, I really like it. I don't really care that they actually have the branding on it. It looks nice to me. And then there's also this geometric hinge right here. So if I open up the laptop, you guys can see that it actually props up the keyboard as well. So it's a little bit of a geometric hinge. It's like a triangle at the end here. I personally really like it. And then it's also got the rounded corners on this side. So this computer has a 13.3-inch 4K UHD display, and it's also touchscreen, which is kind of nice. It's a WLED display, which is basically just a marketing term. So just think of it as a regular LED display. There's also a really nice Island full-style keyboard that is backlit as well. I don't have it on right now, so I can't show you the backlight. But the backlight is pretty nice. It doesn't show through the bottom that much. It's not like there's like space on the side of the keycaps, and it's just through the little engraving that they have on the letters here. The laptop is also pretty lightweight. It's only 3.05 pounds and about 1.4 kilograms. And the overall size is also pretty small as well. So it's 12-inch by 8.5-inch by 0.6-inch. So considering that it is pretty small, it is on the smaller side in terms of laptops, I do expect that it is supposed to be lightweight, but the fact that it actually is lightweight is nice. And then for the speakers, there's this front grille for the Bang & Olufsen speakers. There's 2 on the front here, and then there's 2 on the back here. So let's start with the trackpad. The trackpad is really nice to use. It's almost like a Mac trackpad, which, if you're not familiar with the laptop space, Mac trackpads are typically the best ones out there. It's really nice to use. However, there are 2 things that are wrong with it. The first thing is that since the speakers are so big, that means there's not a lot of room for the trackpad itself, which means that it's a really short trackpad. And if you are someone who uses this laptop always on the go, you never have it plugged into a monitor or peripherals, it is one of the major downsides of this laptop. It's just that the trackpad is nice, but it's small. So let's move on to the keyboard. It is backlit, actually, and it's a really nice keyboard. It takes a little bit of time to get used to, but once you actually do get used to it, it's a super fantastic keyboard to type on, and I absolutely love typing on it. It's pretty tactile, it requires a bit of force, and it's a little more tactile than the Mac keyboards. Okay, moving on to the speakers. This is something that is a little disappointing because they have some pretty decent speakers in here if you have it oriented the right way. So if you have the screen tilted like this, you can have the audio played nicely, because this right here, the speakers, the audio will come out this way. So when you're using your computer like this and you have your screen tilted like that, the audio comes towards you. However, if you have it tilted normally, you can see that the speakers point up. So it's not as immersive as I would like it to be. In addition, the back speakers, so 1 and then 2, they're both not great. They don't really add much. So even if I cover them, it doesn't really change the audio experience. So I would like to see better back speakers and tilted front speakers, so that way it's a little more immersive. I also forgot to talk about the touchscreen, and the touchscreen is okay. It's nothing stellar, but it's fine for basic use, which brings me to a slight issue. The trackpad and the touchscreen, when you use both of them, they have some noticeable input lag, probably about 1/4 of a second. So say you're scrolling through a website, it'll take about 1/4 of a second for it to actually register, scroll, and then when you release, it'll take about 1/4 of a second for it to finish that scroll. It's noticeable, but once you use it for about a week or so, it kind of starts to go away and you don't really notice it as much. If you use it plugged in, there's no input lag. So if you use a mouse, if you use keyboard, there's no input lag at all. But if you are using the touchscreen, if you're using the trackpad, there is a little bit of input lag. Now, it's not incredibly annoying. I've kind of gotten used to it as I've used it a little more. But if you are using it for the first time, it is kind of annoying. So now let's talk about the hardware specs. And this is the thing that pains me the most. I'm going to talk about them first and then go through what I think should be changed. But let's start off with the CPU. So the CPU is an i7-8550U, 15 watts, 4-core 8-thread, 1.8 gigahertz base clock, 4 gigahertz boost clock, which is alright. It's not great, as we'll see in benchmarks a little later. There's 16 gigabytes of onboard DDR3. There's an MX150, which is the 15 watt variant, not the 25 watt variant. However, it does have 2 gigabytes of GDDR5. And there's also a 512 gigabyte PCIe NVMe SSD, which is probably the best thing, maybe apart from the RAM, on this computer, sadly. And for the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, there's an Intel 802.11ac Wi-Fi 2x2 Bluetooth 4.2 combo chip as well. So I actually ended up writing down some notes on what I think should actually be changed on this laptop. So HP, if you're watching, yeah, I would change some of the things about this laptop because it's kind of like a hybrid. So on one end you have like the lower end, or not lower end, but smaller laptops which are basically used for basic stuff. And then you have the bigger laptops which are meant for more intensive tasks. And this is kind of like in the middle, which isn't great. So starting off, it should have the 25 watt MX150 because the 15 watt MX150 is not that good. And compared to the Intel display, it's maybe a little better. Sure, it is better, but it's not that much better. So I would put the MX150 25 watt variant in here instead of the MX150 15 watt variant. And now you're probably wondering, well, they didn't put one in because of inadequate cooling. Well, there was an MX150 in here anyway, so you might as well not even put it in at all if you are going to put an MX150 in. So if you are going to put one in, like in this laptop, it should always be the 25 watt variant. Regardless though, 16 gigabytes of RAM is nice, the 512 gigabyte PCIe NVMe SSD is nice. I'm not sure if NVMe was actually needed because if they're trying to market this towards creators for the NVMe aspect of it, there's not enough power in this thing to actually video edit. I've tried doing it. I tried it in 4K, I tried 1080p. Light 1080p editing is maybe okay. You cannot use a lot of heavy effects, you cannot green screen, so this thing can really only be used for basic 1080p footage, which NVMe SSDs don't really have a huge speed advantage in. Okay, before we move on, let's talk about the I/O and the battery on this thing. So the I/O is actually decent. There's 2 USB 3.1 Type-C ports, which can also be used for charging. It's not Thunderbolt. So even though there is a little lightning symbol next to it, that's to indicate you can actually charge from it. You can't actually use Thunderbolt 3 devices. There's 2 USB 3.1 Type-A ports. One of them can actually be used for charging. On this side, there's a power port right here, and there's also micro SD card reader, which is nice. I would have preferred a full SD card reader, a standard size one, but micro SD card is fine. And then there's finally a headphone and microphone jack right here. And the battery is also a little underwhelming, which is weird because this thing has a triple cell 51 watt hour lithium ion battery, which populates a lot of the lower end ultrabooks, but yet this battery life isn't great. It only lasts me for maybe the entire day. It's just enough to get me through the entire day at school, and I only have about 2 or 3 classes where I'm actually pulling it out and using it for things like Google Docs or maybe some light coding. It's nothing too intensive, but this thing, the battery life isn't great. Maybe that's because of the screen, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, and I'm going to talk about some solutions that HP probably could have done. But the battery life on this thing isn't great. Even just watching YouTube videos, it'll need to be plugged in after a few hours. Now the first solution is keep the 13.3-inch display, because it's nice for everyday use, but you would remove the MX150, you would keep the 51 watt-hour battery, which would increase the battery life, and you would downscale the screen from 4K to 1440p or 1080p, because at 4K, this 13.3-inch display, the pixel density is huge. It's massive compared to 1080p, and it's not really needed because 1080p screen compared to a 4K screen at 13.3 inches, it's not going to look that much different. It really isn't. And if they downscaled the screen, even maybe kept the one MX150 15 watt, and they kept the battery, or maybe they removed the MX150, I don't know. It would be perfect for everyday use. It would be better to carry around, and overall it might even be lighter. The battery life would be better, and overall it would just be a better school notebook. Now on the other end of the spectrum, you could take this, you could increase the screen to 15.6 inches, keep the resolution at 4K, or even downscale it maybe to 1440p, increase the GPU to the MX150 25 watt variant, or even the MX250 25 watt variant, I think that exists, and upgrade the battery as well, because 51 watts just isn't going to cut it for something like this. And even right now, the 51 watts just does not cut it. Moving on to Cinebench R20, our CPU got a score of 1,256 in the multi-core, which isn't outstanding because that's 50 points behind the Ryzen 3 2200G. And albeit the Ryzen 3 2200G is a much higher GDP part and it's also desktop, but when you look at the scores of the mobile chips as well, you can see that at 15 watts they outperform what Intel offers, and that's that's not great because this thing is supposed to be kind of like a borderline, as I explained before, between like a school notebook and like something a little more powerful. And it's not really offering much in terms of CPU performance. So it's not great. Our single core score was 357, which is similar to something like an i7 4770, and Ryzen 5 1600, or the i5 6500, which is okay because realistically, you're not going to need too much single core performance, and something like the IPC of the Ryzen 5 1600 on this laptop is more than enough. Now moving on to temperatures and the fans. So the temperatures are fine. The temperatures never really get above 85 degrees Celsius when video editing or gaming. But the one problem is that the fans kick up even at relatively low CPU and GPU usage. So like, I'll be watching YouTube before bed and the fans will kick up to like 50 to 75% speed, which is super annoying. And I haven't really tweaked anything. I haven't tweaked around fan curves or anything like that. I'm not even sure if I can. But the fact that at stock, this thing will blast itself even though it's not really that hot. So how do I use this computer? Well, as I said before, it's my daily driver. So I use it for schoolwork, which mainly consists of things like coding, Photoshop, light web browsing for things like Google Docs, or maybe some online stuff. I don't know, whatever we're doing in class that day. I also use this for some YouTube stuff, so sometimes I'll edit videos on this computer, and sometimes I'll write out scripts on this computer. Now, I will use this thing plugged into my monitor and peripherals via USB-C whenever I can, because it's a lot nicer to use. The screen is bigger, although it is a lower resolution, the screen is bigger. The peripherals are also much nicer to use than the trackpad and the keyboard, because obviously I can have bigger things and it's just a lot nicer of an experience to use. So I will dock this thing whenever possible. So if you're not plugging in a monitor, if you're not plugging in peripherals, I would not recommend this laptop because there's just too many issues with it. The battery life isn't amazing, the trackpad is small, and the speakers are kind of lacking. It can handle some light games, but only at 1080p, so you're going to have to turn the screen down to 1080p from 4K, and you can pretty much only play on the lowest settings. And if you want to do video editing, you're kind of out of luck unless you want to do light 1080p editing with minimal effects and absolutely no green screening. I tried doing green screening on this computer and it just did not work. Now, who should buy this laptop? If you're someone who's like me, you can afford to use this thing docked a lot. I have a lot of times, especially now, I can use it docked pretty much all the time. And if you're someone who doesn't really mind the lacking features as much, if you don't use it very heavily outside of like a docked station, then this might be the choice for you. If you can get it under $600, anything above it, I would not recommend it. If you can get it below $600 and you kind of use it the same way as I do, then I would recommend it. But if you're paying more than $600, if you're paying $650 or $700, there are better used options out there.